discuss and possible action on draft resolution concerning the data centers. I have the resolution right here.
But you want me to give a little,
Sure.
couple of reasons as to my recommendation for this resolution?
I do want you to do that, Tony, thank you.
All right, so, as you all know, there's been, this data center issue has been a hot, pretty hot issue. And there's been a lot of requests for the village to pass an ordinance specifically banning or outlawing data centers. And while that concept rings true, legally speaking, there are some difficulties with that. And so my recommendation to not do that is really kind of based on four reasons. The first is, as we discussed at length at the last meeting, under your current zoning ordinances, a data center would not be allowed in any of your zoning districts. So the first principle is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If we don't need the law outlawing something, we should not kind of duplicate that. The second concern is that anytime you have a zoning ordinance or any other sort of ordinance that specifically targets one group of individuals or one type of property owner or one type of industry, that potentially opens up the district to some legal challenges based on constitutional issues. In that I'm not receiving the equal protection under your laws as other property owners are. And whether such a suit with regard to data centers would be successful, I'm not sure. But I do know that any sort of suit like that would be really expensive and difficult to defend, and would really place a burden on the burden of proof would be on the village to demonstrate that the statute was constitutional, not that the property owner would have to prove it's not constitutional, and that's difficult, right? The third reason relates to burden of proof again. Is if we pass an ordinance that says you can't do something, for us to enforce that ordinance, we would have to prove a negative. We would have to prove you cannot do this under our ordinance. As opposed to right now, if somebody wanted to build a data center, the burden would be on them to prove that under our current laws, you can. And that, first of all, you never want to be having to prove a negative. That's very, very difficult to do. Secondly, we shouldn't be in a position where the village is forced to defend itself on a specific ordinance, whereas we have the general ordinance already in place. And then the fourth reason relates to that too. There is a concern in the community that companies with lots of money and lots of power and lots of attorneys will come in and they'll roll into court and they'll get to do what they want to. Well, there are flaws with that argument to begin with, but the problem is if you enact a specific ordinance saying you can't do something, it's, for all intents and purposes, impossible to draft an ordinance that will cover everything, right? And your exposure in ordinances comes from movements. And big companies with lots of resources and really savvy business people and crafty lawyers, that's what they do, right? They look for loopholes as to why you didn't do this or you didn't do that. And why take the chance of opening up such an argument by being proactive on something that, like I said, it's impossible to cover every contingency, every potential. We call it a data center, and then all of a sudden they call it a data delivery hub or some, crafty argument where, well, the ordinance doesn't apply. So that's the reason why I really can't advise you all to pass a specific ordinance. But we want to make sure that the community is confident in your position on the data center which we've established. And so you can't do anything that necessarily binds a future village board. Because any village board, if 10 years from now somebody come in and it's 3 different members and they change the law, and there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is ensure the citizens of the village that the village board, as it sits today, won't do some things. And so we'll read this ordinance out loud, or this resolution out loud. But what it does is, first it goes through kind of the history and a little bit of history of why Greenleaf became a village in the first place, was to preserve the rural and character of the area. And then it goes forward and declares, you all as the village board, that you won't change the ordinances to allow a data center. But that can only go so far, because there's a statute on the books, it's WSStat 9.20, and it's called the Direct Legislation Statute. So electors can come and say, we want this law, right? And so technically electors can come and you have to have a petition circulated that covers at least 15% of the people who voted in the last gubernatorial election that says, we want you to do this. If you get such a petition by people who want data centers, which could happen, because 15% if you conglomerate some landowners and become, and they want to be able to have a data center, the village board can do one of two things if the petition passes muster. You can either just vote on it yourselves, or you can submit it to the electorate, where at the next election, the electorate votes on, do we want to have this ordinance or not? And so the second part of this resolution is declaring that you as the village board, if you ever get such a petition, you're not going to rule on it yourself. You're going to put it to an election. And that preserves the power of the electorate to say, do we want the ordinance changed or not? Which was one of the takeaways from the last meeting I was at, is that if you being only 3 people, there's some concern that, it only takes 2, right? By you passing this resolution, you're saying, if that ever comes up, we're going to turn it over to the citizens of Greenleaf to make a decision. And it goes on the ballot, and if it's voted yay, it automatically becomes law.
Right.
If they vote no, it's not a law. And so I think to both protect the village from legal challenges, and again, not fixing what's not broken, but also providing assurances to the village that this data center, which I believe the village board considers dead, right?
Yes, yeah.
That moving forward, if anything like that happens, we're not going to change the law. And if somebody wants us to, we'll turn it over to you to decide. That's something I'm comfortable with, and I think it's a good medium, and it's a good step to ensure the citizens that you all aren't going to go rogue and all of a sudden allow data centers.
Right.
I mean, that's.
Well, and putting it in their hands, then.
Yeah, and if there's a huge outcry.
Then, if the people that don't want it, if the majority do want it. Yep, it's on the electors, not 3 little souls sitting up in front.
And before we read the resolution and present it for approval, you all have made your position known. You're going to be doing, assuming you adopt the resolution at the beginning. From a legislative purpose, frankly, the state legislators are who concerned citizens should really be advocating with. Because at the end of the day, if the state wants to pass a law saying you have to allow data centers, that's the law. And there's a similar law for solar farms. There's a law on the books that the legislature passes that you can't want to say no to the solar farm. You can regulate it, but you can't say no, right? So if there's concern that all of a sudden the state is going to say you have to allow data centers, first, there's nothing you all can do about it. And second, you should be proactive addressing the state senators and representatives to say, we don't want this type of stuff in our communities if we don't have to, and we don't have to. So that's just a side commentary, really, to enforce why you are doing what I feel legally is best to protect.
And I feel very comfortable with that. So, okay, that being said, let's read the resolution. Village of Greenleaf Resolution Number 26-03. A resolution declaring that the Village of Greenleaf's zoning ordinances do not allow for the construction and operation of a data center, and that the Village of Greenleaf will not amend its ordinances to allow the construction and operation of a data center without submitting any proposed new or amended ordinances to the electors of the Village of Greenleaf pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 9.20. Whereas, as a result of the ever-expanding digital world, including the expansion of artificial intelligence or AI capabilities, there has been an increase in demand for the construction and operation of data centers, which are defined as facilities used to house computer systems and associated components such as telecommunications, data processing applications, and data storage systems. Whereas construction and operation of data centers require extensive amounts of real property, electricity, water, and other resources. Whereas many Wisconsin cities, villages, and towns have been approached directly or indirectly to determine whether data centers could be constructed and operated in such cities, villages, and towns. Whereas in 2025 and early 2026, certain citizens of the village of Greenleaf were approached and asked whether they would be willing to sell real estate to a developer, which, upon further examination, was revealed to be an entity operating in the business of constructing and operating data centers. Whereas many citizens of the village of Greenleaf expressed their desire that the village of Greenleaf not allow the construction and operation of any data centers within village limits. Whereas the village was incorporated for many reasons, including, without limitation, to ensure that its rural character and nature be maintained and continued despite the significant amount of urban-style growth and expansion within northeast Wisconsin, including within Brown County. Whereas, in furtherance of this purpose, the village of Greenleaf has enacted zoning ordinances pursuant to Wisconsin law that create various zoning districts and control what activities may be performed or pursued within each zoning district. Whereas the Board of Trustees for the village of Greenleaf, in conjunction with the village council, has determined that the construction and operation of data centers is not permitted within any of the zoning districts defined in its zoning ordinances. Whereas only the Board of Trustees of the village of Greenleaf have the power and authority to amend the village of Greenleaf zoning ordinances, unless an amendment is requested pursuant to section 9.20 of the Wisconsin statutes. Whereas the Board of Trustees of the village of Greenleaf recognizes and agrees with the desire of various citizens that the construction and maintenance of data centers not be allowed within village limits. Whereas the village of Greenleaf has an obligation to the landowners and residents of the village of Greenleaf to make determinations as to development within village limits that align with the desires of such landowners and residents, and it has an obligation to refrain from enacting or revising ordinances that could be subject to legal challenge on constitutional grounds. And whereas the Board of Trustees of the village of Greenleaf wishes to formally express its position and opinion as to the construction and operation of data centers within village limits, and to explain how any future requests of an amendment to its zoning ordinances will be handled. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the village of Greenleaf, Brown County, Wisconsin, that the zoning ordinances of the village of Greenleaf do not permit the construction or operation of data centers within any of the zoning districts existent within village limits. The Board of Trustees of the village of Greenleaf will not amend its zoning ordinances to permit the construction or operation of data centers within any of the zoning districts existent within village limits unless it receives a petition pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 9.20 from at least 15% of the votes cast for governor at the last general election in the village that requests a specific proposed amended ordinance be adopted. And if such a petition is received, the village board will submit it to the electors of the village of Greenwood for approval or rejection pursuant to the provisions of Wisconsin Statute 9.20, adopted by the Board of Trustees for the Village of Greenwood, Brown County, Wisconsin, this 11th day of March, 2026. So, make a motion. Can I get a motion to adopt the resolution? 9.20. What?
26
Oh, sorry. Okay, can I get a motion to adopt the resolution number 26-03?
I make a motion to adopt resolution 26-03.
I second the motion. The motion is carried.
Is there an opportunity for public comment?
At the end. Thank you. It's a committee.
We had a resident, our Julie Carter, reached out and talked about the committee. She talked about it in February, and I reached out to Tony on it. And Tony's view was,
Yep, so the request was to form a committee with regard to the data center issue, to work on some ordinance language and so on and so forth. So my concern there primarily dealt with the fact that any such committee, if it's tasked with something, which is what the purpose of the committee would be, that then becomes a subcommittee of the governmental body. And that subjects you to the open meetings requirements, the public records requirements, so on and so forth. And then, that's a hassle, obviously. And I've already advised the board, so that committee, for the consideration, if they wanted to draft an ordinance, we would probably need to retain separate counsel to advise that committee on the ordinance drafting, so I can advise you on the ordinance drafting. On top of the fact that we passed the resolution tonight, obviously you can create the committee if you want. I'm not in a position to tell you to do that or not do that. Just keep your eyes open that there would be some steps that would have to go along with it. Yeah, you have to notice the meetings, you have to open everything.
it would be just like what we're
It would be
doing.
just like what we're doing now.
So, and within that committee, are you gonna pay all the people too?
Well, no, you don't have to. That would be part of the charter to create the committee. But so long as, even if none of you as the village board members were on it, if you're creating it and directing it, then it's a subcommittee. And there was a case that was litigated up to the Supreme Court in 2017. It involved the Appleton Area School District where they had a committee of citizens to review some curriculum materials and then make a recommendation to the school board. And those meetings weren't noticed and open, and then it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court said, yeah, because they were tasked with something by the governing body, that's a subcommittee of the governing body, therefore it's a public body. And so that's where.
So community members can start a committee on their own and but not in the whole.
100%, they can start a community instead. No, if you're involved, because you only have a 3-person body, even, no, first of all, if 2 of you were involved, that's. You know, and even to have one of you involved, because you're the ultimate decision maker, I have to advise that that's a body of the
Right.
village.
Okay.
But yeah, if the citizens want to start an advocacy group or, yeah, by all means.
Okay.
I have one thing in reverse on this stuff.
Hello. Julie Carter, 138 Forest Fair Road. I have a couple things I need to talk about tonight, so I appreciate that you started taking a to bring this to your attention since it came up in January and then again in February. We've asked for a resolution in January, we've asked for moratoriums, we asked for ordinances to be looked at. At the last meeting, I believe, Bonnie, you mentioned that we were going to have Tony take a look at the ordinances again. The next day, you mentioned to Channel 2 News that we were going to have him take a look at the ordinances to put our minds at ease. So I'm not prepared tonight to talk about a resolution because I was under the impression that we were looking at not in an ordinance saying data centers are not allowed. I do not believe that's illegal, so I agree with you what you were saying on that, Tony. But I think the resolution is a good step in the direction. However, I'm a little confused when the resolution says repeatedly that it's not allowed in our towns, well, in our village, but you mentioned we can't change the ordinance or mention that AI data centers anywhere in there because we could be opening ourselves to a lawsuit. So I did not have a chance to prepare, like I said, to discuss resolution, so I'm a little confused on that fact.
I think we learned from the last meeting, I advise the village, and it's not in anybody's interest for me and you to get into a back and forth about what's legal and what's not. I've provided my opinion to my client. As I explained before, I think this puts suspenders on the belt, and so I'm going to leave it.
And I honestly, this protects us and puts it in the hands of the community if that's what, if it comes down to it, it goes to the vote. So if people in the village vote no, it's still no. It was no before, it was no January, it was taken off the table in January, it was no in February, and yes, I said we were gonna have him look into an ordinance, which I asked him to do. He drafted the better deal so that they could not come under in a loophole and name themselves something else under that ordinance of data center or whatever. This, to me, is a solid protection. It puts it in the hands of the residents. So if you have a bunch of residents, if you have the grand majority of residents that want that here, and you have the people who are willing to sell their land for that, then it's out of our hands anyway. This way, we're good. You have to, you have to feel a victory at some point, because financially, we are a very small village, and the legal fees alone every month, it just goes on and on and on, and it's the same month after month. We're clear, we're good. Our zoning ordinances are in place, and now we have a resolution that turns it over to the community.
Thank you for your input, Bonnie. I appreciate it. I mentioned it once before. I was not prepared to discuss resolutions this evening, so I do not have written responses ready. I am a little confused why the town of Grangetown is looking at an ordinance, but the village of Greenleaf is looking at a resolution.
I think that was a misposting on the town of Grangetown's agenda, Julie. I think it was supposed to read resolution also, and the clerk is actually on vacation, so I think that's why that happened.
Okay, I just want clarification on that. The other thing I wanted to ask about was the intergovernmental agreement with Brown County. I was just curious why that change came about now.
What was changed?
Why are we going to the Brown County for something for the wetland, shoreline?
We always have, Julie. They've always taken care of it. They've taken care of it for the town, and they've taken care of it for the village. We're not changing anything. We're just signing an agreement. We didn't have one with them. We never had. The village agreements never had one.
back up, but the resolution, so, like she said, we really didn't get a chance, and nobody besides the board, maybe just you first glance at it also. But based on the attorney, could have it been worded differently instead of having data center put in? Could have been a large facility, whether that's a widget factory. I'm just asking, you know, look down and answer if it's yes or no, could it be square footage size? So we're not limiting it to a data center?
I apologize, Steve, I'm not sure what you're asking.
As far as this resolution, earlier we heard that it shouldn't have data center in it because that could open up some legal action
For ordinance.
for an ordinance, or for a resolution, ordinance, resolution, whatever that is. So my question is, should have been worded differently for a large-scale facility? And somebody would have came up with a square footage. If something coming in, whether it's a foundry or a widget factory or whatever it might be, and it's gonna be X amount of square footage, we put something in, now you got a setback of whatever the zoning we wanna have it. If the building is gonna be 100,000 square feet, the setback needs to be larger or something.
I mean, that's getting into, you know, part of the reason why this resolution was prepared is because of the specific data center concern. Even a large manufacturing widget facility wouldn't be allowed in your ordinance as currently. And so, you know, I'm confident that because this is a resolution, somebody could attack it and say, well, we're not a data center, but that kind of deals with, you can't think of every contingency. This was, frankly, we can't cover every contingency. This is as strong as I can be. If there's another issue that comes up in the future, like super duper mega farms, or, you know, somebody wants to come in here and put in, you know, a huge warehouse, you know, like an Amazon facility or something like that, none of that would be allowed under your current zoning ordinances anyway. But if it comes to the level of concern, honestly, I'd address it the same way. Resolution
Well,
number 4.
and then
It's-
the people would have to sell or resell their land in the first place, correct?
Or we find out like we did the last.
Yeah, that was something.
So
That-
it's,
That's where I agree with you, you can't cover everything. Who can think of what's coming in the future?
Yeah.
That's where I was saying, if we didn't put a name on it, if you had a square footage, I really like the idea of putting things to a vote, like you mentioned, that you have in this
Yes.
resolution. So if something came, whatever that might be, that we can proceed, and it's X amount of square footage, it has limitations to it already, because now it can only go in certain areas where the zoning may or may not get changed, but it has to meet certain setbacks, but then it also goes to a people.
yeah, I think if that arises, we tackle that at that time. Because again, we already have certain setback requirements and stuff, so it's one of those things where when they come up, we could, you know, we address it.
Are the setbacks different for different size facilities?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the zoning ordinance.
Not that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, I mean, but again, we're kind of talking, you know, frankly, a lot of the data center talk was about hypotheticals. So, yeah.
And it still is, that's why I want to take data center where it's out.
Well,
Is it too late for this resolution to have it worded, not data center? Per your recommendation, it shouldn't have said data center.
No, you're misconstruing my words. And, no, I'm not gonna continue the dialogue. If the board wants to talk to me, maybe my time on.
So I got one other thing. Is there anything currently in any of the zoning that would limit the board from signing any type of non-disclosure agreement?
We would,
No, I'm just asking if there's something, not personal opinion, but is there something in the books saying that we could or could not?
No, the zoning ordinances or no other zoning ordinances could address that. And frankly, in my opinion, a non-disclosure agreement by a municipality is pretty, you know, you could argue that under one of the open meetings exceptions for bargaining, that you would keep it secret. But, that, you know, it's like when we settle lawsuits, people want confidentiality. Well, I can give it to you, but if somebody makes an open records request, I gotta give them the agreement. You know, to a great extent, they're a fallacy for a municipal body. We can't really keep anything confidential. And I certainly wouldn't do it in writing.
yeah.
Um,
Dave, I am such a paranoid person that the reason I did not, announce the, Cloverleaf backing out was because I knew I had to check with Tony first. There's no way I'm signing anything, saying anything, doing anything without making sure it's legal, because I ain't going to jail, and I ain't throwing my village in the fire. So,
But we're not gonna be around it forever. There's gonna be somebody else, and that's what I'm asking, if there's some way that we could protect the community so the next board or future board doesn't.
No, no.
No way.
I mean, if a new board comes in, they can take away the resolution and pass tonight. That's just the nature of the beast. We can't pass an infinite ways.
So
Even if we said we did, if three new people come in and say, we want to overrule it, and they vote on it, well, that's how the government responds.
So if there's an ordinance on the books, the new board would take that away, or would it have to go through the planning commission?
I'm not gonna get into it. This is not productive. I know you asked me questions. If the village has concerns, I can answer them.
All right, answers and